Hi, and a very good day to you all. My name is Pratibha Bhatnagar, and I will be the host for today's session. I am a senior technical lead working on Navigate and smart connected apps. I have around 11 years of experience in core development. I am a tech evangelist, have keen interest in latest technical stack and innovation. I'm also an active contributor to PTC Innovation Runway projects. Today's presentation is one piece of a larger series of expert sessions that are designed to bring users of our IoT and AR products up to speed as quickly as possible. These sessions will cover a large set of topics including design, development, deployment, maintenance, and tips, as well as new capabilities of our software that could benefit you. If you have questions during the presentation, you are more than welcome to type them in our Q&A box. We will be reviewing them live at the end of this presentation. If there is any question that cannot be answered live, we will share the answers later along with the session's recording. I am happy to have an opportunity to showcase in today's session how one can utilize the PTC Navigate reusable components to build the custom apps quickly. These components are built in-house by the Navigate team with the focus of fast assembly, pluggable activation, and less turnaround. The components are highly configurable, provide depth of features to customers for easier adoption and integration. These components are built as plugins to allow fast and efficient assembly and are upgradable. Now let's take a look at various Navigate web components. Attributes component is a widget that displays the name value pairs. The value always appears below the name. You can display values of different data types. A set of attributes can be presented as a group using a group name. Next, we have the item identity web component, which is of type widget that lets you display basic information, also known as identity information, on a specific item. The information contains the image, the primary title, secondary icon, and the various identity attributes. It also contains an embedded action bar, and you can also expand or collapse the widget. Item list is another web component which is of type contain mashup that lets you display a list of items from a dataset in a grid view. It also allows the end user to search, sort, and filter the list and perform actions on the entire list for the specific list items. Progress component is a widget that displays the status of the progress graphically. The component displays the overall progress as a horizontal progress bar and the individual details about the progress below the bar. The tiles component is a widget that lets you display name value pairs, also known as attributes, in a tile format. The purpose of the tiles component is to highlight the key pieces of information so users can see them at a glance. We also have action bar, which is a component of type widget that displays a range of actions available to the user. The actions appear as a row of buttons in an accompanying list of boxes. Now let's quickly jump to our demo. We have built this mashup for the demo purpose. I can enter a part number here and click on search. This will fetch the part results from the backend system. Now I will click on the part number and it will navigate me to the parts mashup. Here we are fetching the part identification information using the Navigate Item Identity web component. You see here the part title, the secondary title, few attributes, and image. We can also collapse and expand the component. Here we are fetching the part list or the assembly of the search part. We are using the item list navigate component, which is of type mashup. Here we have configured name, number, version, and few other attributes as columns. You can see we have find capabilities in the item list and also an export feature. We are also fetching the part PVC image from the backend system using the ThingView widget. Now I will click on this part and it will highlight the corresponding part in the image. It will also fetch the dynamic attributes for this selected part. For fetching and displaying the dynamic attributes, we are using the Navigate Attributes web component. Now I will move on to the Related Changes tab. Here we are fetching the related changes of the searched part. Here we have the change request. Clicking on the change request will fetch all the affected items for that change request. We are using the Navigate Item List web component to display both the list. Let's see how we can create this mashup in Thingworx Composer using Navigate Web Components. These components have tremendous capabilities for rapid application development. We will use the same to generate the mashup with ease and some configuration and bindings. Now I have created a mashup that I will be using in this demo. I have added containers and a Thingworx tab widget to build the layout. Now let's start by configuring the identity information of a part. For this we can use the Navigate Item Identity component, which is of type widget. I'm going to drag and drop the Item Identity component from the widgets section. For using this component, I need to configure the attributes that I want to fetch from the backend system along with the input, that is the ID of the part. Now I will click on the gear icon to configure the attributes. This will open a pop-up and list all the predefined configurations that are shipped out of the box along with this item identity component. We see that part identity is already available for us. I will select this configuration. It will list here a JSON config that has the information populated for us. Now let's take a closer look at this configuration. Here, the key properties are the primary title, which is configured as number and name. Then we have the secondary title, which is the object type, and the attributes. Here we have configured the attributes that we want to fetch from the backend system and the object type, which is ptc.prodmgmt.part. You can visit the PTC Navigate documentation website to get more detailed information. Now let's get back to the composer. I will mark it as done and save it. Now next I will configure the input. I will click on the bind icon and I will add a source for my input. So I will bind it to the input expression. We see here that the binding is created. I will mark it as done and save it. Now let's see how this looks like at runtime. So here we see the item identity component fetched the part attributes from the backend system. Here we have the primary title, secondary title, the attributes, the image. Now let's get back to the mashup and start configuring the part list. For this we will be using the Navigate Item List component, which is of type mashup. So I will move to the mashups section and I will look for item list. I will drag and drop the item list to my container. Now we need to configure this component in the similar fashion. We will start first by configuring the attributes. So I will click on the gear icon. So this is the predefined configurations that are available along with item list. Search result is a custom implementation only created for this demo. Now we see here we do not have a part list config. So I will show you how we can quickly create a custom implementation of an item list to fetch part list. So we will start by creating a thing template. I will call it as ptc.nav.partslist thing template. This template should inherit from the ptc.nav.itemList business logic thing template, and I will save this. Now, in order to create an implementation, I will need to override few services. Now let's start by overriding the get configurations. So here we need to add our configuration that we will see when we click on the gear icon on the item list. So I already have a configuration created. So here we have the name on which we want the sorting to happen, and these are the attributes that I want to fetch for the path list. So I will copy this and I will paste it here. You can start by building your configuration using the existing configurations that are available, like for task, or you may visit the documentation website and grab a sample configuration to start with. I will mark it as done. Now let's override the next service, the get items. Now here we need to write the code to fetch the data from the backend system. So I have this code already built for me. So here I am calling the adapter and the service, which is get related items. So PTC Navigate has an adapter which has a couple of services that you can use to fetch data from the backend. Here we are using the get related item service. We are passing the input, the relation key, and the attribute CCO. Now I will mark it as done and save it. Now I will create a thing from this thing template. I will call it as ptc.nav.partslist thing template, partlist thing, and I'll save it. Now we will override few more services here. I will save this. Now we are ready to use our part list custom implementation. So I will go back to my mashup and I will click on the gear icon. Here, now we see the part list configuration. I will select this and save it. Now next we will configure the input for this part list. So I will click on the bind icon and I will add source for the input. I will bind it to the same expression and we see binding is created and I'll mark it as done. And I will save this. Now let's see how the part list looks like in the runtime. Now we say that our parts list custom implementation fetch the part list data from the backend system. We have here the name, number, quantity, and other attributes as columns. Let's move back to the composer and start configuring the WebGL to fetch the PVC. For that, we will be using the WebGL contained mashup. Please note, this mashup is not yet available out of the box. So I will start by zooming in to reach the container. I will click here and look for my WebGL mashup. I will drag and drop this mashup. Next, I will configure the bindings. I will click on the bind icon and bind the input part to the same expression. Next, I will bind the selected row to the selected items of the part list. We see both the bindings are created. I will mark it as done. Next, I will configure the attributes component. So I will move back to the container and drag and drop the navigate attributes web component. I will click on the gear icon to configure it. Here we see a generic configuration that is shipped out of the box with attributes component. This is more of like a template where you can add your attributes and the object type. Here currently you see a JSON configuration, but in future we plan to replace it with a UI. I have already created a configuration where I am fetching name, object type, state for a part. I will copy this and paste it here and save it. Now next we will configure the bindings. So I will first bind the selected row of the item list. I will add target and I will bind it to this function. This function will convert the input to the output. I will mark it as done. Next, I will configure the input for the attributes. I will click my attribute component, click on the bind icon and bind the input to the same expression. The binding is created. I will mark it as done and I will save it now. Now let's see how our mashup looks at in runtime. I will refresh it. Now you see here, the WebGL contain mashup fetched the PVC image for the part. Now I will click on a part and we will see the corresponding part is highlighted in the image. We also fetched the dynamic attributes for the selected part. So now let's start by configuring the related changes for a part. So I will move on to the related changes tab and I will drag and drop the item list. We will need to create a custom implementation of item list to fetch the related changes. So I will start by creating a thing template. I will call it as ptc.nav.relatedChanges thing template. I will inherit it from the ptc.nav.itemlistBusinessLogic thing template and I will save it. Now I will start by overriding few services. So first let's override the get configurations. Here we need to provide the configuration that will be used to fetch data from the backend. I already have a configuration ready. I have configured the sorting fields and the attributes. I will copy this and paste it here. I will mark it as done. Now let's override the get item service. Here we need to write code to fetch data from the backend system. Please note the navigate adapter does not support fetching data for related changes. So we will make a call directly to the connector. I have the code ready and I will just paste it here. I will mark it as done and save this. Next, I will create a thing from this thing template. I will call it as PTC-nav related changes thing and I will save it. I will override few other services. For more information, you can visit our documentation website. I will mark it as done and I will save this. Now, our related changes custom implementation is ready to be used. So I will go back to the mashup and I will click on the configure icon. Here I will select the related changes. This will populate the configuration. I will mark it as done. Next, I will configure the input. So I will click on the bind icon and I will add source to the input. I will bind it to the same expression and after the binding is created, I will mark it as done. Now, for every row click, I need to fetch the affected items. So for that, I will again be using the item list component. So I will move to this container. I will zoom in a bit. Select this container and drag and drop the item list. Now I will configure it for the affected items. We have an affected items configuration out of the box. I will select it and mark it as done. Now next I will configure the input. So for that I will configure the selected row of the related changes list. I will add target and I will bind it to this function. I will mark it as done. Now next I will bind the input for the affected items. So I will move on to the list, click on the icon and bind the source for the input. Now this will be bind it to the expression. I will mark it as done and save it. Now let's see how our mashup looks at in runtime. So here we have fetched the related changes for this part. Clicking on this change should fetch the affected items for this change request. We see that affected items are fetched.